"I've never been touched," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding rain against the asphalt. My fingers trembled around the steering wheel of my beat-up Honda Civic as I pressed the accelerator harder, desperate to put distance between myself and the shadow that had been following me all evening. The streets of Manhattan blurred into streaks of neon, reflections of traffic lights melting into puddles on the wet pavement. I glanced at the rearview mirror for the 100th time, heart hammering in my chest, catching only the faint gleam of a black SUV closing in, its headlights slicing through the storm like knives. My chest tightened, lungs burning, as I realized there was no escaping. The SUV stopped beside me at the next intersection, and time seemed to slow. The door opened with a deliberate grace that betrayed no urgency, and a man stepped out, taller than anyone I had ever seen, shoulders broad, dark hair slicked back, eyes the color of a stormy ocean that seemed to pierce right through me. He moved with an aura that demanded attention, a calm control that made the chaos of the rain feel trivial in comparison. I wanted to speak, to tell him to go, to scream, but my words caught in my throat. His gaze fixed on me, unwavering, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Without a word, he walked closer, the world narrowing until it was just the two of us, the rain fading into a soft patter around our bubble. I noticed the precision in every movement, the tailored suit, the subtle scent of expensive cologne, the quiet confidence in the way he held himself. Then he spoke, his voice low, measured, carrying a weight that made me both anxious and intrigued. "You're not running from this, Emma." The name alone sent a thrill of fear and curiosity through me. I tried to pull away, my hand gripping the door handle, but he reached out, not to touch, just to steady the car beside me, and in that moment, the raw authority in his presence pressed against my senses. I could see the glint of stormwater on his shoes, the careful stance that suggested power restrained, not abused. My breath caught as I realized that every instinct I had learned about survival was being challenged, not by a threat of harm, but by a force I couldn't name, a magnetism that both terrified and captivated me. I swallowed hard, trying to force my legs to move, to close the gap, but the SUV seemed to exude a gravitational pull, and I found myself frozen, heart racing, palms slick on the steering wheel. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly, scanning me with a focus that was unnerving, and then, in a soft but commanding tone, he said, "You belong with me tonight." The words struck with the weight of inevitability, a declaration that left no room for argument, yet didn't demand surrender. My pulse thudded in my ears, the rain's rhythm fading, replaced by the electric tension of that moment. I realized I was standing at the edge of something unknown, a world that shimmered with danger and allure, and though every rational thought screamed to flee, a part of me, a part one hadn't acknowledged, was already leaning toward him. And in that split second, as the storm whipped around the city streets, I understood that my life was about to change forever, pulled into orbit around a force I could neither resist nor fully comprehend. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle as I followed the black SUV through the winding streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. Every turn seemed to take me deeper into a part of Manhattan I thought I knew, yet the shadows felt different, as if they were watching, waiting for something to unfold. Derek did not speak, and the silence inside the SUV was heavy, almost tangible, but it was not oppressive. It carried a weight of expectation, of authority, of unspoken rules that I had no choice but to obey. I could see him in the rearview mirror, posture rigid, eyes scanning the cityscape, alert to every sound and movement beyond the tinted windows. The contrast between the chaos outside and the controlled calm he exuded made my heart race in ways I could not name. When we finally arrived at a building set apart from the rest of the city, a sleek high-rise that gleamed under the dim streetlights, my breath caught. The lobby was pristine, glass and marble reflecting the soft glow of recessed lighting, a quiet testament to wealth and meticulous order. He led me inside without a word, each of his movements measured, deliberate, the kind that demanded attention without force. As we ascended in the silent elevator, I tried to steady my thoughts, reminding myself that I had a life outside this moment, responsibilities, plans, but every instinct told me that those things were irrelevant now. Derek's presence filled the space, not physically overwhelming, but mentally commanding. I noticed how his gaze lingered, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me hyper-aware of every breath, every shift of my weight, every tiny motion. When the elevator doors opened to the penthouse floor, the view of the city sprawled beneath us was breathtaking, light stretching to the horizon, a sea of movement and life that contrasted sharply with the stillness inside this space. He gestured for me to follow, and the apartment revealed itself as a study in subtle luxury, clean lines, polished surfaces, books carefully arranged, and a quiet order that spoke of a mind used to control. I sank into a chair by the floor-to-ceiling window, feeling the warmth of the room against the chill of the night, trying to process the rapid events that had brought me here. Derek moved to the opposite side of the room, not threatening, not imposing, but unmistakably dominant in his own right. His attention never wavered, and I realized that I was acutely conscious of how small gestures, a tilt of my head, a shift in my posture, were noted and catalogued. When he finally spoke, the low timbre of his voice resonated through the room, calm yet undeniably commanding. "You are safe here, but understand this: nothing in this world moves without consequence." The words were not a threat, not explicitly, but they carried an undeniable power, a truth that made me aware of my own vulnerability and his control without a single harsh gesture. I felt a strange mixture of fear and trust, confusion and clarity, as I realized that the line between protection and possession was thin and precise, and that my life in this room, at this moment, was subject to a rhythm and authority I had never experienced. And yet, despite the tension, despite the rapid cascade of thoughts and emotions swirling within me, I could not deny the fascination, the pull, the sense that I was on the cusp of understanding a world larger than I had ever imagined, a world that he ruled quietly, deliberately, and with a force that was as magnetic as it was inescapable. The city lights stretched like a river of fire below the glass walls, each building a silent witness to the storm that had carried me here. I shifted in the chair, the fabric cool beneath my fingers, and tried to steady the rapid thrum of my heart. Derek stood near the window, hands behind his back, his profile sharp against the skyline, and I could feel the careful calibration of his presence, the way he commanded space without a single gesture of force. The quiet hum of the air conditioning mixed with the distant sound of traffic, a subtle reminder that the world outside continued its rhythm while inside, time moved differently. He did not speak immediately, and the pause stretched, drawing me into an awareness of every detail: the glint of the metal accents on the table, the way the polished floors reflected the muted light, the soft sway of the curtains in the gentle breeze. When he finally turned, his eyes met mine with an intensity that made my pulse spike, yet there was a quiet patience in his gaze, a deliberate assessment, as if he were weighing possibilities, measuring reactions, calculating the next movement in a game only he understood. "You are here now," he said, voice low, precise, not questioning, not demanding, merely stating a fact that carried more weight than any order could. I swallowed, the lump in my throat reminding me of my own uncertainty, my own fragility in the presence of such controlled authority. I could not look away, could not turn my attention from the way his eyes scanned mine, noting the smallest twitch, the slightest hesitation, cataloging my every move without intrusion, without pressure, yet fully present. Slowly, he moved toward the desk, fingers brushing against a leather-bound book, then paused, letting his gaze sweep over the apartment once more, as if reinforcing ownership without a word. I felt a mix of apprehension and curiosity, a tension that vibrated in my chest, the kind that makes every breath feel heavier, more significant. My thoughts raced, trying to reconcile the calm power he exuded with the urgency and unpredictability that had defined the past hours, and yet despite my racing mind, there was a thread of trust weaving through the fear, fragile but undeniable. He gestured for me to stand, and instinctively, I obeyed, feeling the unspoken rules of this space, the careful balance of freedom and guidance. As I followed him toward the expansive living area, the lights reflecting off the glass surfaces created patterns that made the apartment feel like a stage, yet the intimacy of his presence grounded me, a tether in a world I did not yet understand. He stopped near the central couch, leaning slightly against the armrest, eyes never leaving mine, and for a moment, the city beyond the windows faded, leaving only the pulse of tension and the unspoken dialogue that passed between us. The air was thick with anticipation, yet no threat lingered, only the weight of control, the quiet assertion of his place, the way his very being shaped the space and drew my attention like a current I could not resist. Every instinct in me screamed to be cautious, yet another part, a part one had not acknowledged until now, was drawn, compelled to understand, to observe, to follow, aware that the night had shifted, that the trajectory of my life had changed irrevocably, and that I was standing on the precipice of something vast, something defined by a presence that was as commanding as it was enigmatic, as magnetic as it was precise. The soft glow of the floor lamps cast long shadows across the room, and I found myself drawn to the vast windows that framed the city skyline like a living painting. The streets below were a patchwork of movement and light, but the high-rise kept us suspended in a quiet cocoon, a space where the outside world seemed distant and irrelevant. Derek remained near the center of the room, his posture calm yet commanding, and I could not help but notice the subtle details of his presence, the tilt of his head, the measured pace of his breathing, the way his eyes constantly scanned the environment without missing a single nuance. I shifted my weight, unsure whether to speak, to break the stillness that hung like a tangible force in the room, and in that moment, I realized how attuned I had become to the rhythm of his movements, how instinctively I responded to the unspoken cues that seemed to guide everything around him. When he finally spoke, the words were deliberate, precise. "You must understand that the choices you make here have meaning." There was no judgment, no threat, just an assertion of control that made the air feel heavier, more charged. I swallowed hard, trying to reconcile my fear with a growing curiosity, the awareness that I was in a space governed by rules I had not learned yet, rules defined by a presence that demanded attention without asking for it. He moved toward the large sectional sofa, not in haste, but with a confidence that made each step significant, and I followed instinctively, noticing the quiet grace in his movement, the way he occupied the room without encroaching, creating a space where his authority was clear, yet subtle. I perched at the edge of the sofa, hands folded in my lap, aware of the tension that vibrated through the air, a quiet electricity that made every sound and motion feel magnified. Derek gestured toward the balcony doors, the sheer curtains swaying slightly as a cool breeze filtered in, and for a moment, he allowed the silence to stretch, letting me absorb the scope of the environment, the scale of the world I had been thrust into. I felt exposed, not in a way that caused panic, but in a way that heightened every sense, every thought, every heartbeat. The tension was palpable, yet it was not oppressive, it was instructive, a lesson in the subtleties of power and presence. He finally moved closer, stopping a few feet from where I sat, and the weight of his gaze settled on me, steady and unwavering. I felt a strange mixture of caution and trust, as though the act of being seen in this way carried its own gravity, a responsibility that I had not anticipated. The city lights reflected in his eyes, revealing the faintest flicker of something softer beneath the intensity, a glimpse of intent that contrasted with the precise control he exhibited. I could sense that the evening had only just begun, that the unfolding of this strange, suspended world would continue to challenge and draw me in ways I had never imagined. And in that realization, I felt the first stirrings of understanding, the awareness that my place here was neither simple nor safe, yet it was undeniably part of a narrative that I could not step away from, a story that demanded attention, presence, and a willingness to navigate the intricate balance between caution and trust. The soft hum of the city below seemed to fade further as Derek led me across the polished floors, each step measured, deliberate, as if marking the rhythm of a world I had not yet learned to navigate. The warmth of the apartment contrasted sharply with the chill outside, a quiet enclosure that drew my attention to the small details, the careful placement of furniture, the gleam of glass surfaces, the way shadows moved with the light, painting the room in subtle shades. Derek paused near a low table, gesturing toward a set of documents and photographs spread across it, not speaking, allowing the silence to build tension and curiosity. I stepped closer, unsure of what to expect, and noticed the meticulous organization, the precision in every line, every photo, every note, reflecting a mind that left nothing to chance. My fingers hovered over the edge of the table, and I felt the subtle gravity of his presence behind me, a constant reminder that I was not simply observing, I was participating, a part of this orchestrated space. He spoke then, low, deliberate, "Everything here has meaning, and your presence here changes that meaning." The words were calm, not accusatory, yet their implication made my heart beat faster, my mind racing to decipher the layers of intent. I could feel the tension of unspoken understanding, the push and pull between caution and intrigue that defined the air. I stepped back slightly, noticing the faint reflection of the city in the window, and felt the contrast between the vast uncontrolled world outside and the controlled environment Derek commanded. He moved to the balcony, hands resting lightly on the railing, eyes scanning the horizon, and I realized how every aspect of his world, from the smallest detail in this room to the vast skyline beyond, was influenced by him, molded, anticipated, and mastered. The air shifted subtly as he turned his gaze toward me again, calm and commanding, a quiet insistence that made me acutely aware of my own position, my own choices, and the subtle ways they were already influenced by his presence. I drew a slow breath, feeling a mixture of apprehension and fascination, a tension that pressed against my chest while also compelling me to observe, to learn, to understand. He did not move closer, did not speak further immediately, yet the gravity of his gaze held me in place, balancing on the edge of awareness and participation. Each sound from the city below, the distant car horns, the muted chatter, the occasional siren, seemed to underscore the contrast between the controlled stillness of this room and the chaos outside, reinforcing the reality that I was in a space governed by another's rules, rules I had not yet learned, and that understanding them was both necessary and inevitable. And in that suspended moment, with the city lights stretching endlessly beneath us, I realized that the night was only beginning, that the lessons of control, presence, and subtle influence were unfolding around me, and that my attention, my perception, and my instincts were all being measured, guided, and shaped in ways I had not anticipated but could not resist observing. The quiet click of the balcony doors closing behind us marked a subtle shift in the air, a moment where the outside world felt both distant and irrelevant. I followed Derek across the smooth hardwood floors, each step deliberate, my senses alert to every subtle sound, the soft hum of the lighting system, the faint creak of the floorboards beneath our weight, the distant echo of a train somewhere below. He paused near a large sectional sofa, the leather cool under his hand as he rested lightly on the armrest, and I could not help but notice the precision in every detail of his posture, the quiet confidence that radiated from him without needing to speak. I perched on the edge of the sofa, fingers intertwined, heart racing, aware of how the balance of power in the room seemed to shift with the slightest movement. Derek regarded me steadily, not with suspicion or interrogation, but with a focused, measured observation that made me feel both exposed and seen in a way that was difficult to describe. "This is your first night in a world you do not yet understand," he said, his voice low, smooth, carrying a weight that drew my attention to each word. I swallowed hard, feeling the pull of anticipation and uncertainty, the mix of fear and curiosity twisting inside me as I realized how little I knew of the space I had been brought into and the person who had brought me here. My gaze drifted to the city skyline beyond the windows, light stretching endlessly, yet my attention was drawn back to him, to the subtle shifts in his expression, the faint tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes traced my movements with precise awareness. I shifted slightly, adjusting my posture, and he inclined his head ever so slightly, acknowledging my motion without a word. A silent communication that carried more weight than anything I could have spoken aloud. The apartment seemed to breathe with us, each reflective surface catching and diffusing light in patterns that made the room feel larger, more intimate, more deliberate. I could feel my own heartbeat, each pulse a reminder of the heightened awareness that hung in the air, the delicate balance between observation and action, between freedom and guidance. Derek moved toward a side table, running a hand along the smooth surface before pausing, then gesturing for me to follow. I obeyed, aware of the unspoken rules, aware that each movement, each glance, was catalogued and considered, not in a threatening way, but in a manner that made me realize how attentive he was, how deliberate, how entirely present. The night stretched on, time seeming to slow in the high-rise cocoon, and I felt a growing sense of comprehension, the realization that this world operated by a rhythm I had not yet learned, and that Derek, in his quiet, commanding way, was guiding me toward understanding, toward awareness, toward a sense of place in a space that was both unfamiliar and undeniably compelling. Every subtle movement, every measured pause, seemed designed to teach, to challenge, to draw me in, and I could not deny the magnetic pull, the sense that my attention, my perception, and my instincts were now part of an intricate, unfolding rhythm I had no choice but to follow. The room felt almost suspended in time as I moved cautiously toward the center, each step deliberate, the subtle creak of the floor underfoot sounding unusually loud in the stillness. Derek's eyes never left me, scanning every motion, every adjustment of my posture, each subtle flicker of emotion that crossed my face. The soft hum of the city below seeped through the glass walls, distant and muted, a reminder of the world beyond this high-rise sanctuary, yet entirely irrelevant in the presence of the calculated control he radiated. He gestured toward the large, open space in the living area, a silent invitation to explore, to engage, to understand the boundaries of the environment he commanded. I hesitated, feeling the tension of awareness, the subtle pull of anticipation, yet compelled to move forward, to follow the rhythm he set. Every detail of the apartment drew my attention, the precise arrangement of furniture, the polished surfaces reflecting light in patterns that shifted with each motion, the understated elegance that spoke of a life curated with intention and control. I sank into a low chair near the corner, aware of the gap between us, yet attuned to every slight movement, every tilt of his head, the way he adjusted his stance without breaking the equilibrium of the room. "You notice everything," he said quietly, his voice carrying the calm assurance of someone accustomed to being observed and to observing in equal measure. I nodded, feeling the truth in the statement, the awareness that my presence, my reactions, and my perceptions were all part of the silent dialogue he conducted through his gaze and demeanor. I shifted slightly, adjusting my position, and he inclined his head subtly, acknowledging without speaking, a silent communication that was both reassuring and commanding. I felt the pull of curiosity, a tension that twisted with the rising awareness of my own vulnerability, the recognition that this space operated on rules I did not yet fully grasp, yet was beginning to sense through his guidance. He moved to the balcony doors again, the curtain swaying with the soft breeze, and I noticed how his eyes scanned the horizon before returning to mine, as if mapping both the external environment and my internal state simultaneously. The city stretched endlessly, lights forming constellations that seemed distant yet intimately connected to the room we occupied, mirroring the invisible lines of influence he projected. Each breath, each movement became a measure of connection, of attention, a silent assessment that drew me further into the rhythm of the night. And in that stillness, as the hum of the city and the soft swish of the curtains filled the space between us, I understood that my perception, my awareness, and my response were all now entwined with the cadence he set, a delicate balance of observation, trust, and the quiet assertion of presence that left me both captivated and profoundly attentive, knowing that the hours ahead would unfold with the precision and subtle intensity he controlled so effortlessly. The room was quiet now, the distant hum of the city blending with the subtle ticking of a wall clock, marking time in a space that felt both suspended and alive. I stood near the window, watching the reflection of the city lights dance across the glass, yet my attention was drawn back to Derek, who had moved to a small table against the far wall. His movements were deliberate, precise, a study in control and calm authority. He opened a sleek, leather-bound notebook and began to review it with meticulous focus, his eyes scanning each line, each note, as though deciphering a language only he fully understood. I felt the pull of curiosity, the urge to step closer, to see what occupied his mind, yet I remained rooted, aware that every shift, every glance, every subtle motion was observed, catalogued, and considered. "It is not enough to be here physically," he said softly, his voice cutting through the quiet like a measured echo. "You must understand the flow, the intent, the unspoken rules that govern this space." I nodded, absorbing the weight of his words, the implication that being present demanded more than mere attention, it demanded perception, awareness, engagement. He closed the notebook gently, the soft sound resonating in the room, and moved closer, stopping a few feet from where I stood. I could feel the energy in the space shift, a subtle gravitational pull toward his presence, a quiet insistence that my focus, my awareness, and my thoughts were aligned with the rhythm he set. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the acute consciousness of being seen, fully, without judgment, yet entirely measured. I stepped forward, compelled to engage, to participate, to meet the intensity of his gaze, and he inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement, a silent communication that balanced control and invitation. The city stretched below us, lights forming endless patterns, yet the room felt insulated, a cocoon where the only signals were those we shared, subtle, precise, loaded with meaning. I realized that understanding this space, and the man who controlled it, required attentiveness beyond the physical, a navigation of emotion, presence, and unspoken understanding that challenged every instinct I had. Derek spoke again, low, deliberate. "The world outside will not wait, but here, you will learn the rhythm, the presence, the awareness needed to move with it." Each word was measured, yet carried a weight that made me acutely aware of my own reactions, the rising tension of expectation, the quiet anticipation of what was to follow. I felt a strange mix of apprehension and curiosity, the sense that every breath, every glance, every decision was part of a larger pattern, and that my place in this room, in this high-rise suspended above the city, was both precarious and instructive. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, and I became attuned to the subtle pulse of the apartment, the quiet control of Derek's presence, the invisible thread that connected my awareness to his rhythm, drawing me further into a world defined by precision, observation, and a careful, compelling authority that left me both cautious and utterly engaged. The first light of dawn filtered through the expansive windows, casting a soft glow across the apartment and illuminating the polished surfaces that had seemed almost alive in the darkness of night. I remained seated, fingers tracing the edge of the sofa cushion, heart still racing from the intensity of the previous hours, yet tempered by a growing sense of clarity and awareness. Derek stood by the balcony, arms crossed loosely, gaze fixed on the awakening city below, the early morning traffic a muted contrast to the quiet control he exuded. I watched him for a moment, noting the subtle way he measured his own presence, the careful balance of observation and stillness that made the space feel structured yet fluid. He turned his attention back to me slowly, eyes sharp but not accusing, and I felt the weight of his focus, the gravity of being observed so completely without judgment. "You have learned much already," he said, voice low and deliberate, each word carefully chosen, "but the understanding comes not from seeing, but from perceiving." I nodded, absorbing the meaning, realizing that every small motion, every glance, every breath I had taken had been noted, and that this attentive awareness was part of the rhythm he maintained. I rose from the sofa, feeling a mixture of anticipation and resolve, stepping closer to the center of the room, aware of the subtle shifts in energy as Derek adjusted his stance slightly, an unspoken invitation to engage more fully with the space and with the presence that dominated it. The sunlight moved across the floor, highlighting the fine grains of the wood, the reflection of the city lights still lingering faintly on the polished surfaces, creating a dance of illumination that seemed to mirror the internal movement of thought and attention. I felt the tension of the night ebbing, replaced by a heightened sense of clarity, a comprehension of the deliberate patterns and careful control that defined the apartment, the space, and the man who guided it. Derek approached slowly, steps measured, eyes locking with mine in a way that carried authority, patience, and a quiet insistence. "There is a balance to be understood here," he said, gesturing lightly to the cityscape and the room we occupied, between observation, action, and restraint. "You are learning to recognize it." Each word resonated, the cadence of his voice both grounding and compelling, shaping the room and my awareness simultaneously. I inhaled deeply, feeling the alignment of focus and understanding, the recognition that the world outside would continue at its pace, yet within these walls, every choice, every perception, every movement mattered. The sunlight crept further across the room, and I realized that the night had shifted into a moment of awakening, of insight, of connection. Derek's presence remained steady, unyielding yet patient, a silent guide that demanded nothing overtly but commanded attention and awareness, and I understood that the lessons of the night, of presence, and of perception would extend beyond the confines of this high-rise, into the rhythms and choices of the world outside. And in that understanding, a quiet certainty settled within me, a comprehension of rhythm, authority, and attentive observation that would guide the steps I took from this moment onward, a subtle but undeniable connection to a space, to a presence, and to a world I was only beginning to navigate.